Thank you, Bruce. That was the only thing that I had to take exception with. I don't really consider myself an expert on 5G. I'm just someone who has read about it enough that hopefully I can communicate some of the basic concepts to you and try to talk about some of the concerns and questions that I know are out there. I first did this talk for the Rocky River Public Library where I am employed, and I did that for one of our computer breakfast series, and Joan was kind enough to invite me to come this evening to reprise the talk for you. I've been reading a little more about it and looking to see what's happening. Bruce is very right that you don't want to go out necessarily and buy a 5G phone. There are only a handful available, and they're quite expensive, and things are still developing. Verizon promises 5G in the 3 big C's of Ohio, meaning Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, pretty soon. But we'll talk about what that entails. So thank you for inviting me, and I'll dig into the presentation here now. So a little bit of history first. We know that things developed over time, right? This one starts with the history slide, and then we get to 1G, which is really analog cell phones. So the first mobile phone was created by Motorola in 1973, not all that long ago. Before 1973, there were cell phones in cars and on trains. Martin Cooper from Motorola made that first mobile call in the United States, and he called his rival at Bell Labs, which I just think is a great first phone call, right? Call your enemy. I did it before you. 1G systems started here really in the early 80s, and they were supplanted or superseded by digital systems in 1990, and then eventually they were turned off in 2008. In an interview in 2010 with CNN, Martin Cooper, that person who made that first mobile phone for Motorola, says he knew one day the devices would be ubiquitous. He just didn't think it would be in his lifetime. Right? And he said that he knew someday everybody would have one, but it did happen in his lifetime, and now there are more than 5 billion of these things on the planet. As the mobile phone industry grew, the devices themselves have grown along with it. And he wasn't all that keen on how complicated they had become. He said, I must tell you, as much as we were dreamers, we never imagined that all these things could be combined into one. And I'm really not so sure that it's a great thing. Phones have gotten so complicated, so hard to use, that you wonder if this is designed for real people or for engineers. And I can sympathize with that. He said, I think what's really going to happen is we're going to have a lot of different kinds of phones when our industry grows up. Remember, this is almost 10 years ago. Some that are just plain simple telephones. And then the best thing about the interview, he says, in fact, my wife and I started a company, and she designed the jitterbug. And so the guy who made the first mobile call ends up saying, well, these things are getting to be way too complicated, and he and his wife create a simple phone called Jitterbug. And of course, that doesn't mean he doesn't stay up to date with everything. He had an iPhone, but he gave it to his grandson, and now just uses a Motorola Droid. So, you know, he says, I think that the Android phones are catching up now. This is 3 years after the iPhone comes out. It just takes the world by storm. But he says, you know, they'll be better. They'll be just as good, he says. Believe it or not, in 1993, the IBM Simon was introduced. It came out in 93, and it was probably the world's first smartphone. It was a mobile phone, a pager, a fax machine, a personal digital assistant. It included a calendar, an address book, a clock, a calculator, a notepad, email, and a touch screen with a QWERTY keyboard. Right? It's amazing. The IBM Simon had a stylus, which you used to tap the touch screen. It featured predictive typing that would guess the next characters as you tapped. It had applications, or at least a way to deliver more features. You could plug in a card that had something like 1.8 megabytes of memory into the phone. Coinciding with the 2G digital call systems was a trend away from the gigantic brick phone that you saw in the previous screen, and to some extent here, to 3.5 to 7 ounce weight handheld devices. If you remember some of the initials, there are lots of acronyms in this industry. CDMA, which is Code Division Multiple Access, is one of the 2G technologies that refer to 2 and 3G things. It's a kind of multiplexing, which means it allows numerous signals to occupy a single transmission channel. So you can use more of the available bandwidth, so they can do more things over that single line of communication. The Europeans used a standard called Global System for Mobile Communications, or GSM, and there were lots of others. Finland starts doing this in December of '91. By the mid-2010s, it became a global standard for mobile communications. It got over 90% of the market share. So GSM standard originally described a digital circuit switch network that was optimized for full duplex voice telephony. And that expanded to include data communications, where we start seeing data plans. Subsequently, the 3GPP developed third generation standards, and then followed by the fourth generation, where we see LTE attached to that, long-term evolution, which is what that stands for. Just like Windows NT, was just new technology. That was the hidden letters of Windows NT. So these were the first generations of digital cellular technologies. So 2G gives us things like the Simon. We see the SMS craze start. SMS is small message service, or texting. So people start texting each other in the early 90s. In 1998, you could buy content and download it via a cell connection. Right? You could get new ringtones for your phone. And then in 1999, we get the first full cell-based internet service introduced in Japan. So over our mobile devices, we're starting to get the internet, texting, other forms of content and communications. In 1991, we get a payment system, which starts in the Philippines, a mobile payment system. All right, so 3G comes along, and it brings up speeds. It brings the speeds up from a couple hundred kilobytes per second to a few megabytes per second, and that's really a big advancement. Some of the 3G technologies like EBDO, HSPA, UMTS, those mean nothing really, to us, but they were new standards. Basically, a group gets together, creates a bunch of standards. The industry decides to work towards those standards, and things overlap, and things get developed alongside each other. Bruce mentioned, 4G is being developed as we speak, as 5G is being introduced, and it'll continue to be developed for a while. So it's not as though tomorrow you wake up and everything's 5G. It won't be like that. 3G transforms the telecom industry. We start to see streaming radio. I have a couple of streaming radio icons there. Real Audio and Winamp were popular sort of radio services. Use an app or a program, they would call it back then. Streaming radio and TV become possible. Real Networks and Disney pioneered a bunch of services. In 2007, the iPhone appears. That's when it first appears in Japan. And then the iPad comes in 2010. And by 2009, the 3G telecoms realized they have a problem. They realized that the networks are just going to be overwhelmed by users, and the desire for more services. And I wrote kaboom, right? So just 2 years, right, after these smart devices come out, the iPad and the iPhone, they're starting to worry because they know everybody wants one. Everybody's working towards making things for these devices, and it's going to overwhelm the networks. So they come up with 4G, or what might be called native Internet Protocol networks. There's no switching, there's no circuit switching. It's all packets of information going from one place to another. That's the Internet. We see seamless streaming for movies, video conferencing, and all kinds of app functions. We can start to control more things in our homes and everywhere else. Have you ever used Uber or Lyft? These services depend on 4G networks, the speed of the network and how much information can go through them. The connection between your app, the company, the driver, and the payment method are all very close to real time. My wife and I have stood on a corner and said, look, the little car is coming down on the map. And then you look up and there's the car coming down the street. So those kinds of things really depend on speed, capacity, being able to get that information as quickly as possible. So we see 4G technologies, I'm just going to mention LTE. These were incompatible leaps forward with the old technology. So once, your 3G phone will still work today. If you have a 3G phone, it'll still work. You'll just get passed to a 3G cell to do it. When I go to early Sunday mornings, I go and see my brother and a few other people at what's called a turkey shoot. Right? And it's way in southern Cuyahoga County. And when I drive out there, my phone eventually passes down to 3G, the little symbol up on the notifications area at the top. It'll often say 3G or even 1X. So the technologies are still working, but your 4G phone will pass down through those as it can connect to other things. And then I restart it, and suddenly it connects to 4G again. Might be time for a new phone. So these things are still at work, but in order to use 4G, your 3G phone can't go up. In other words, the devices don't go up; they tend to work backwards, if anything. So we're now scaling up to hundreds of megabits and even gigabit level speeds with 4G. So it's still advancing, and the switch happened, what election was it? It was a couple of elections ago that more people were starting to get their news from the internet rather than traditional resources. The same thing has happened with devices. People used to go online on a laptop or a desktop, and now more people go online through mobile. Right? So we have this push now for redesigning the internet mobile first, because more people are looking at it that way than are looking at it through a laptop or a desktop. So it's become an important arena, and that's why all this stuff's happening. So if I can see the Uber coming, why do I need 5G? So it's really kind of an investment, not for today, but for the next decade. In previous mobile transitions, we've seen most of the big changes happening years after the first announcement. So in 4G, the first 4G phones in the US appeared in 2010. That's just 3 years after the iPhone appears in Japan. But the applications that sort of changed the whole ball game didn't appear until years after that. So Snapchat comes in 2012. Uber becomes widespread in 2013. So several years after 4G phones started becoming available. Video calls over LTE networks also became widespread around that time. Skyping people, FaceTiming people. those are 4G technologies really that were made possible by that speed and power of those networks. This information was actually from a PC Magazine article called "What is 5G?" So I would urge you to go out and read a few articles about this, because you can really find Tom's Guide is another good website that they're constantly updating what they know about 5G and what's happening right now. So there are a lot of good websites that will do that. So our experience of the internet is really affected by the status of 3 measures. I can remember when I first started working in an Ohio library that had a high-speed internet connection. Right? In the late 90s, the General Assembly of Ohio created the Ohio Public Library Information Network, and that's when all but one of Ohio libraries gets hooked up to the Department of Administrative Services high-speed backbone with T1 lines at that point, and I used to call home the World Wide Web, and then work was the World Wide Web. And then it would flip back and forth. My home service would get upgraded, and then work became slow. But do any of you remember using library computers where after school let out, everything just sort of slowed down? Because every kid was coming in or going home, and they were just starting to play their games and do all their stuff, and it was just the networks were filled, right? The traffic was full, and everything would slow down then. So they're playing their massively multiplayer online games. I got it. So it was like that because there wasn't enough capacity, right? So that everything slowed down. So we're really talking about 3 different measures here. We're talking about speed of communications, we're talking about latency, which I'll explain in a minute, and capacity. So, issue 1, do I really need more speed? Speed decreases download times. Have you ever watched that symbol for a while? Right. You're waiting for your movie to play from Netflix, and it's just grinding away. Sometimes you go back out of the app, and then you go back in, hoping that that'll make it better. But speed is what decreases the need for buffering. Right? If you can get that information faster, then you have it. You don't have to wait for it. Can you imagine downloading a 4K movie in seconds? That's what 5G is talking about. Right? Getting an ultra HD quality video in just a few seconds. Have you ever waited while your movie stream buffered or even failed? Or if you play games, have you been forced to play your online game or video at a lower resolution? Because when you tried to play the higher resolution video or game, it wouldn't work. Did you know that some services will automatically lower your video quality based on your internet connection speed? I didn't know that until I started reading about this. And there are some tests that you can do to help figure that out. But when it comes to answering this question, do we really need more speed? Well, not yet, not really. Because 4G can probably get up to gigabyte speeds, gigabyte per second speeds, which is pretty good, right? Most of us aren't enjoying that right now. So they still have a path of advancement that they can go through, and we should get up to that speed on mobile, right? I'm not talking about your wired home network or even your home Wi-Fi yet. But 5G may eventually be many times faster than that. So 10 times faster than gigabyte speed is pretty fast. Right? It's really the other 2 issues that are going to make a big difference with 5G. So, do I really need less latency? Why is latency important? what is it? Let's consider it from, well, so latency is the time it takes for your request to get to the server and for the server to send back a response. I've been playing the same computer game with one of my friends for more than a decade, right? And here's how we think of latency. We call it death by lag. You're trying to move because the opponent or the monster or whatever is going to chomp you, and you're running, you're pushing the button that says run, 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 and your character's just standing still. Because something's gone wrong where there's a lag time between that request, run, 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 and the server recognizing it and taking the action so you can see it. Right? And chomp, 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 your character's done. So death by lag. But it has real world implications too. It has implications for telemedicine. So you're probably wondering why I have Roy and Johnny from the TV show Emergency. How many people remember that TV show? They had a device that was really a pioneering device in the world of telemedicine. It was called the biophone. It was a radio through which talk and ECG or EKG could be transmitted at the same time. Remember, they would talk to the dark-haired doctor at the hospital, right? And they would crank that thing up and get it going. It was used on TV, and it in fact was accepted into the Smithsonian Museum's Museum of American History. It was such a breakthrough device. It allows the doctor to evaluate some aspects of patient health and talk back and forth to the first responders and advise them what to do. So, today, would you let a surgeon, a specialist surgeon from Pittsburgh, operate on you using telemedicine or remote medicine? Imagine now why latency, less latency is good, right? The doctor says, cut. Uh-oh, it moved, right? So less latency could be very, very important. I would argue, I would need to know what the latency factor was if I was going to submit to that kind of operation. How good is your connection? So latency could be important when it comes to emergency services. Right? Any delay in an emergency service can cost a life. And where are you most likely to incur a delay in emergency service? It's the picture of the vehicle, right? The transport. Right? This is where you can have big problems. So is it possible for an ambulance to move as fast as possible through traffic? Well, if we can overcome the problem of latency, it probably is, because that means they can get communication fast enough to change the light or to avoid the other vehicles. Self-driving vehicles will require us to lower latency to the smallest amount possible. And really, one of the ways they're talking about doing that is not just having the cars talk to some central place, but talk to each other. Right? It's a whole lot less distance to go from this car to that car than it is to go from this car to some big server somewhere and back out to that car. Factory automation. Have you ever seen the video of the Amazon robots running around in the factory? It's mesmerizing to watch how fast they go. Right? They're cruising along, all of a sudden they stop and another one zooms past in a different direction, and they're just all sort of doing this in concert. Well, lowering the latency means reducing the risk of a crash of those things in the process that they have. If the robots can communicate directly to each other, then the latency of commanding them is reduced. If one malfunctions, the others can be aware more quickly. and alter their paths to compensate for the broken one. So we could see real impact in this world. Video calls is another cause for reducing latency. Voice and video over IP. Video calling is something more and more of us are doing on a regular basis. The Rocky River Library has done interviews via video conferencing services. We've been able to see and react to distant relatives. Right? Every day an alarm goes off on my phone. It's on my pocket brain. I shouldn't call it a phone anymore. It goes off and says, call the grandkids. And once in a while we do, and we use a video conferencing app so that not only can we, they're not talking to us yet. They're only they're only a year and 2 years old. I finally got the one to call me Opa, which is German grandma. We want to see them because they grow like little weeds, and that's a good way to do it, is to use a video conferencing app. Now, do you remember the experience of using video conferencing like Max Headroom, right, where everything's stuttering and getting stuck, and you talk for a minute and then realize they're not responding because it's stuck, right? Well, less latency can be good there. You don't have any delay of communication. We sort of tested out which ones worked best for us, and we've settled on Google Duo because it's simple and it seems to work really reliably back and forth. And that's all we're doing. It's just, she's pointing it at the grandkids, and we're trying to get them to say stuff, and we're waving at them and talking to our daughter and her husband at the same time. So 5G, really should allow this to be ubiquitous. There may be a day in our lifetimes where making just a voice call seems weird. What do you mean I can't see the person? Imagine kids are probably already at that point, because that's what they're growing up with, is being able to FaceTime and Skype and Duo and whatever else. I did notice that Microsoft, in Skype, they were working on real-time voice translations. So one person could speak to somebody that only spoke German. You turned on the translator, they would hear your voice, but a couple seconds later, the German translation would kick in. And so they would hear it in their language and then respond to you in German, and then a couple seconds later, the English translation would come in. We just happened to have the right people in class at one point to do that, with, I think it was Hungarian. And I've noticed that recently it seems like they've gone away from voice translation to real-time captioning translations. So you're speaking, and it is showing them in captions a translation of your voice, and that's really in real time. So that requires a lot of computing power to do that. So here's a video. I don't know if I can get it to work in here. Let's see. There we go. So this is a character.
I teleported to Market, and apparently Market is really like that.
She's trying to jump and move.
Attempting to jump.
She can't. Then eventually it starts moving. Right? This is lag. This is too much latency. She's commanding the character, the avatar, to move around, and nothing's happening. And you just sort of, all you can do is go like this. So if my character shoots at your character, and you try to move out of the way, but there's too much lag, then your character gets pwned. That's the word. And mine dances along merrily. Right? In the video, that person's trying to move her character and tries jumping, but nothing happens. And that's what we refer to as death by lag. The 5G lag target is a standard that has been set really, really low, where almost no one should even perceive lag. Whether they can do that, that's the question. Think of training simulators, right? I bank the jet airliner to the right, but there was too much lag, and you smashed into the mountain. Right? So you want those things to respond, right? Or the flock of geese, I think is my example. The mountain seems more, fine. So that's you want the server to have you want that communication to be instantaneous, so there's no lag. Self-driving vehicles. I'm not gonna. This one's come up. You can go and watch this. He says the problem with self-driving cars. He describes it as different levels of autonomy. And right now we don't have true autonomous vehicles. We have vehicles that will drive on a highway pretty well, but you still have to be paying attention because there are points where they don't do very well. And this guy thinks that he went out to Google's Waymo. It's its own company now, or is it somewhere in Arizona, I think he said, or Mexico. And he said we're probably still a decade away from real self-driving vehicles because you can't have the car communicating with, via satellite or some server to get positioned on the road. It has to be, the car has to talk to all the other cars. It has to be able to sense things through the rain and the snow and all that. There's so many points of failure that he thinks it won't happen for a long time. But 5G may figure into that because 5G hopefully will reduce latency and other factors to a minimum. So the answer to issue 2, do we want, is less latency really important? Well, it depends. It depends on so many things. Have you driven from here to Columbus and noticed that sometimes your cell reception goes out? Doesn't matter what kind of phone you have. At that point, your Google Maps doesn't work. Your driving directions stop. Your Sirius radio stops. There are dead spots from here to there. Practically, I think the industry groups are still trying to convince each other that they can achieve that reduction in latency that the standard calls for. But I think we're still going to see issues with that. So it really depends. Do we really need less latency? Well, yeah, it depends. Now, issue 3, on the other hand, do I really need more capacity? This may be the real promise of 5G. The bandwidth that they can achieve will allow so many more connected devices. Have you seen the commercials? Where are they going to test this? There was a commercial that was talking about NFL stadiums. Imagine you've got 60,000, 70,000 people in a stadium. They've all walked in with their smartphones, their Bluetooth headsets, their Apple Watches, all of these devices. Where do they connect? How do they all connect to a network, right? This may be the real promise of 5G, that we can have so many things connected at once, and there's still not congestion. So capacity and latency and speed are all important, but capacity is probably the real promise of 5G. This is a graphic I found online that talks about what's happening each minute online. And I don't know if you can read what some of those things are. It says there are 188 million emails sent every minute. There are 4 million, close to 4.5 million Google searches done every minute. There are over 18 million texts every minute. And a lot of close to 700,000 Netflix users are streaming every minute. So that's a lot of stuff every minute of the day in 2019. And that's really just going up and up and up every moment. It's strange to think that only 20 years ago, mobile phones were really just starting to gain momentum. I can remember having an old Nokia bar phone, thinking it's so cool you can play, what's the game you can play? It was like Snakes and Ladders or something like, something like that. But 5 years before that, 25 years ago, the internet was barely a thing. Now, almost everything we do is connected to our online personas in some form. We have a huge range of our daily interactions taking place in apps. We talk to our devices more than we talk to each other now, it seems. Have you noticed the commercial that says there's more personal information in your smartphone right now than there is in your entire home? So the records, the data, all of the stuff that's in that device exceeds your health app. All of that information exceeds what you have stored in your home right now. Okay? It may be that not every online transaction is beneficial to us. So there could be problems. Tracking everything may not be exactly what you would want. 5G can mean things like smart cities, where all of the traffic lights, all of the street lights, lane signs that can change, all of that stuff, sewer pressure readings and electrical output readings, all of that stuff can be connected at once. And with less latency and more speed, the response can be faster. We can find out. I think it's amazing that I can go online in my windowless basement office and see what it's like outside by going to ogo.com and looking at the cameras. Oh, I better run to my car and grab my umbrella. It's raining. Who knew? I think that's amazing. But imagine, having all of the city services connected in a 5G network that way. So I would argue that the answer to more capacity is yes, we need more capacity because of how quickly we're adopting these technological devices and what we do with them. So it might mean that we have some bad things too. 5G could mean more surveillance. Which do you think will be worse, corporate or government surveillance? Yeah. How many think corporate? Yeah, I do too. In governments, at least, we have put in place some kinds of restrictions. Not anybody is allowed to go and look at the lead's computer in a police vehicle. Right? We have some restrictions on that kind of stuff, but corporations are sucking up our information whenever we use something. How about implications for health? How many of you have heard that 5G could be bad for your health? Yeah. Do you recall irradiated cereal? Anybody remember irradiated cereal? How about the device where you went and stood on the machine and it would show x-rays of your feet, right? Or the thing at the fair where you walked behind it and it showed your whole body, right? These kinds of things, we didn't know at that time could be bad. We're really all guinea pigs now. Right? We'll find out later whether 5G was really bad or not so bad. I can remember when the smartphones first came out, you were not allowed to take them anywhere near a hospital ICU. They were afraid, right? Turn them off, don't even bring them in here. And now you can stand at the foot of somebody's bed in ICU and talk on your phone, talk on your smartphone, and do everything else. So over time, some of this stuff will play out. But I do want to say that the big concern about 5G, I think, comes from a couple places. One is an institute in Berkeley run by a doctor who doesn't necessarily have expertise in that field. Right? And the other has to do with a test where a scientist said that 5G can disrupt, that millimeter waves, microwaves can disrupt cellular functioning. And what he didn't apparently take into account was the fact that human skin stops just about all of the millimeter waves from penetrating to your body. So we don't know yet. And I want to point out that there are lots of things that we thought were cool and then found out later, maybe we shouldn't have irradiated cereal. One of my professors in graduate school talked about taking a field trip to watch an egg-long test. They had that. They lived out there, and they said, "Okay, kids, get the bus. We're going to go watch a bomb blow up." So things will play out. One of the other possible bad things about 5G could be maybe an even greater digital divide. Urban versus rural. Will farmers ever get 5G? Telecoms seem to be trying to address this situation by creating what I would call a hybrid system, where they're using parts of the cell band, the spectrum, the bandwidth spectrum, what they call sub-G signals, which can go a lot farther, more like our 4G towers, where every couple of miles, you could have a tower. Out in really rural America, even that doesn't cut it. Right? So maybe you have to have a tower on your property, or you have to have, a 5G cell on your property at one point of your property, and at the other end you have to have another one. But they seem to be sort of doing this sort of hybrid move where they have technologies that allow, it's not true 5G, but it goes a lot farther and it's faster than what they would have normally. So we'll see what happens with that. It sure would be nice for the farmer to be able to tell the tractor to go plow that field while he isn't in it. So what do we need for 5G at this point, really? The first thing I put in was what we really need are lots and lots of easements. In other words, 5G works on what's called the small cell principle. It only goes, the 5G millimeter wave only goes a few hundred meters. So its signal power, it just can't go very far before there has to be another small cell. So this is actually a picture of a couple of small cell towers. That one on the, can't see my mouse, can you? So on the left picture, it's sort of up on top of that light pole. And then on the right-hand side, there's a bunch of them, a small cell at some street in Oakland. Of course, all this stuff's going to get tested out in California and San Francisco and surrounding areas there. So, you might have one of those on top of your building, or you might have one on the street pole out front. So it's going to require lots and lots of easements to be able to do that. Who owns the telephone poles in your community? Does your community own them? Does do the telecoms share ownership? Those are all questions that have to be answered. So, if you want blanket 5G coverage, you're going to have lots and lots of these small cells. True 5G with the millimeter wave. Everywhere. We also need something I think that we have less and less of these days, but which is only becoming more and more important, and that is patience. Despite the hype, there is no 5G here, right, in this area. What might be here is hype before the real thing. So we have, just like with 4G, the same thing happened. There are only a handful of 5G phones. They're very expensive. I'm not sure I want to go out and spend $1,200 for a phone. My wife's already, my money manager is shaking her head no, so that means I'm not getting one. The handful of 5G phones are there. It's not going to take off probably for a few years. You'll see more and more things become available. When cities get it, it'll be dense urban areas first because they can cover more people with fewer small cells. Right? So you can have 4 on a big apartment building. It even has trouble penetrating glass. Right? So there's still some issues they have to work out with how really, can you keep a 5G signal if you're driving down even a city street? You have to have enough of those small cells to be able to do it. Verizon says 5G pretty soon for I call them our big C's, right? Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. I put Cleveland first. It's not ready yet. Okay. So I think we have some time to read, to sort of figure out where do I figure into this, what do I need. It'll be a while before your 4G phone becomes useless. It'll be a long while. I think they just turned off the analog networks. It wasn't that long ago. So you'll still be able to do things. But then the new apps will come out. The technology, right? The things that everybody goes, ooh, if you tried Uber. That's what really makes things take off. Thank you for listening to all of that. What questions do you have that I can maybe answer? Yes?
Could you describe a little bit more about the limitations of what it can penetrate? Because that strikes me as a huge limitation.
It is a huge thing, yeah. From my understanding of the 5G, the millimeter wave, it can't penetrate walls. It has trouble penetrating normal glass. So do you have a small cell inside, and do you have them interspersed closely so that it covers the area well? So they're still working on that kind of stuff. They have what they call the sub 6 gigahertz spectrum that allows them to cover much farther distances, and it penetrates much more. So I'm guessing, I don't know what the telecoms are doing, but I'm guessing we're going to see hybrid systems until they figure out ways to bend those waves, make them, reflect off of things. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, it has real problems going through things. It's great when you're down on the street and that cell's right there.
But that's also true of 4 and 3.
That's what?
That's also true of 4 and 3.
Right.
If you're standing at it.
Yeah, if you're right by it, but yeah, the technology is still developing.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you won't be able to take advantage of 5G service with a 4G phone.
Correct. It is an incompatible step. I saw one picture of a phone where it had like an array of antennas at the top and the bottom of the phone, and the devices just aren't compatible. So that's why there are only a couple of models available through different carriers.
So will there be new offerings from your internet service providers when 5G comes out in terms of download speeds and all that?
Yes. The mobile 5G mobile service could probably, if coverage becomes good and reliable, could probably replace your home Wi-Fi or even your home internet. If I don't need that wire coming into my house, right? We also have the newer routers have 2-something and 5-something gigahertz connections that you can make. The 5 gigahertz connections are faster, and if you have 5G mobile service, you can stream the video from any device that can pick that up. That would end up maybe being faster than your home internet service. So it's possible we could see the elimination of wired service in our homes. Or maybe you get your own small cell in your home.
Like a router.
Like a router, correct. Yeah. But I don't think that's far. It's not far. Okay.
What are they going to do? Because not everybody lives in a densely populated urban area. Like when I lived on the end of a peninsula, I had no cell phone service. Like I could go to the end of the peninsula at the parking lot and get it, but I didn't have it in my house.
Right.
So how are they gonna, we're a big country.
Yes, and
We are not.
we have huge rural spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where you're still gonna have wired internet, you're still gonna have 4G. The phones will probably be backwards compatible. Right? So you buy a 5G phone, but it'll work on a 4G network or a 3G network. Because yeah, big parts of the country just don't have even the possibility of coverage with 5G. I mean, it might mean that if you have a cluster of homes, you can put a couple of 5G cells right there, and those few homes, but is that cost effective? So it may require some other kind of incentive. I mean, the Tennessee Valley Authority really electrified rural America, and that was a government program. So I don't know how this happens for the farmer. That's one of the things that kind of concerns me. Being a technology trainer is, are certain groups of people going to just be left farther and farther behind in this? It's all being built in the cities right now for obvious reasons. Any other questions? Yes.
Westlake has a problem in some areas with Verizon right now, with a lot of dead zones. And we've offered them close to where I live a place to put a tower. They don't want to buy it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's up with that.
The library didn't used to be able to get service, and I don't know what happened to create that, and now they do. But you used to have to turn your phone off when you came in here, at least a lot of our phones.
Because it would roam itself to death. Yeah, the same thing in the basement where I work at the Rocky River Library. The people in the public computing lab could not get like verification codes on their phones. They would have to run outside to get a signal. We ended up putting in a cell phone signal booster in the hallway outside of that lab. And so now you can get phone service. So there may be solution, maybe that's the kind of solution they did here. But yeah, even at home, I've noticed that my mobile phone service has had issues that it didn't seem to used to have, but now it does. That may have something to do with more people, I don't know. But yeah, that's if you can't do it with 4G, how are we going to do it with 5G? Yeah.
That's going to be interesting. I have Sprint and I have a magic box. So they asked me, I'm in a location where it was bad, and so I have this little box that's plugged in and it works all the time. And basically, it's transmitting Sprint signal in my house. Yeah, in other words, I volunteered to do that. So they did that across the network. What happens with T-Mobile version?
That probably
No, it's free. It's free for me, so I have the advantage of having a better signal in my house.
Well,
However, I'm paying an electric bill for it, but it's the thing is that because I have this in my house, my neighbors or other people that have Sprint in my neighborhood are getting better signal. So they sent these boxes out to people that were.
So you're trying to have a small cell for Sprint in your house.
Yeah, so in other words, it's a little transmitter. So it's a radio. It's a retransmitter. So it's a little box. It's about the size of this book and about 3 inches wide, and it just has a little clock on there.
Yeah, that's what we have on the wall in the library. It's a
Yes.
box like this.
Yes, exactly.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Anything else? Yeah.
Could you comment on reliability factors? History of technology has been the more sophisticated it gets, there's an initial drop, at least initially, in reliability. And sometimes it's exponentially related, inversely related. From everything I'm hearing about 5G, that sounds like it's a big step, not a little step.
It is a big step.
In complexity, and therefore what with reliability?
Well, we'll see. I don't think anybody knows at this point. I think it's interesting and not to me unexpected that they're starting to do real tests in NFL stadiums, because that's where you're going to have thousands and thousands of people coming in and wanting connections. So if they can all, if they can figure out how to handle that, then it becomes possible to apply that, I think, to wider areas and, distributing the cells in different areas and taking on all those signals that way. So
What happens right now in an NFL stadium? Today, if you go in here, what happens to?
I haven't been to an NFL game.
I haven't either, it's my
Shouldn't have priced those tickets.
We went to an Indians game where you could go on to their network, and it was just, it's an issue of, is there enough capacity? I don't recall that, but was the experience good or bad?
No, it was good, but it was like our first day of, we bought the tickets in the app, took an Uber downtown, used the in-stadium app to find the food that we wanted, and we were home. It was like an all digital experience.
Yeah. And it was okay, I don't recall problems. I don't recall going, wow, that's fast, or anything like that. But you have that magnified by, many orders of magnitude because of all the devices that people are getting. You might walk into a stadium and have 2 or 3 network capable devices on one person. So I think that's part of the issue. How do you increase? This is the big, these are standards that were set, and it'll take us probably 10 years to get to those points, I think. Years.
To what extent are satellites at all involved in this process, or is it all just earthbound? The various levels of Gs.
I'm not sure I would include the satellites in the issue. I think we're talking mobile connections to cell towers.
Then is there a parallel thing going on using satellites?
No idea.
I'm thinking Garmin, for instance, GPS stuff.
Yeah, that I don't know, how they're tackling issues of latency and capacity and speed. Who is it that's putting up a bunch of satellites right now?
It's just about everybody.
Everybody? Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, so we're seeing, there's obviously a need for more.
Yes.
My comment is about consumer expectations as this technology begins to come in, not unlike the driverless car or anything else that comes in new. We still have many people who will, the digital divide will be there, and will be there with this. I do some tech support for older people who are having trouble with just basic things related to their computers and their cell phones. And they all want it to be like a car. You just put the key in and you turn it and it runs. And so what I do when I do a fix is I teach them what they need to do. Some of them remember and some of them don't. Some of them write it down and they do it. But there's going to be a lot of education for something of this magnitude, I think.
I don't think so. I think it'll just be, you buy the device, you install the apps, you go. The education, libraries try to meet that need, right, with technology training. You have programs active in different states trying to get people to enjoy higher bandwidth connections. In other words, a group like Connect Ohio is working to get broadband internet access to more and more people. I can't imagine being on dial-up internet at this point.
AOL.
Yeah. That's,
I
can't even imagine it.
I was just in Toronto a weekend ago, and it was at a meeting, and there was a lot of tech tied up with everything going there and coming back. But one of the things that was interesting, they used a QR code to register, and then that would magically print out your badge for this meeting. Very high security in this meeting. The meeting room where all this was to happen was 3 levels down in the basement. Every level were meeting rooms. It was a beautiful facility. But down there is where you get your QR code the day before you leave. They keep that secure. So you go in there and you take your phone and it's gonna read it and the thing is gonna print out. Didn't work, no internet. You know, so these people with all the good intentions, training, background, technology in the world doesn't work. You know, they had a backup, so we've still got our badges and everything was okay. But that's what I mean by the expectations. It's not just mom and pop consumer, but also at the corporate level. And we set this up and it's going to work. And then you've got hacks and you have capabilities and you have speed. Things not being fast when they should be and being too fast when they shouldn't be. I'm not saying against it, but I'm saying a lot's going to have to come with it. Infrastructure to help it.
I measure the state of society, I measure the state of civilization by how I see people driving.
Boy,
Oh, well, in that case.
around
And I have
here,
noticed a change in civility and temperance and tolerance over time. And I think that it's exacerbated by our expectations of this stuff because we can get so much immediately now, whereas before we had to work for it, or you had to be patient, right? You had to go somewhere, and now we have so much, and that part does concern me that our expectations just get higher and higher, and as you said, when something's new, it tends not to work very well, right? So what happens at that point? Do we abandon? At that point, are we just going to abandon 5G because it doesn't work right at the beginning?
I
Or it
think
has
we need more
problems?
education of the public in preparation for it and with it and access to it. Libraries are great and user groups, we're finding people going to learn. People tell me they don't want to have to learn all this stuff. They just want to use it. And it's not the right expectation. And there needs to be, that's what I mean by an infrastructure. Information is infrastructure around the technology and with the technology and introducing the technology.
Well, one school would say we need to understand it, and I think the other school says, no, you don't, you just need to be able to use it. And that's maybe a competing system, competing worldview or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I see it every day at work and on the highways, and how I react when Netflix doesn't start up right.
To see people crying.
Oh yeah.
To see them cry about this. I can't see my grandson. Or what did he do to my computer?
That's right. Yeah, I understand. I'm with you 100% that way. I was one of the first trainers in Ohio libraries once they joined the Ohio Public Library Information Network. So I've watched from day one in libraries as things got more and more advanced and also more and more complex, to the point where some people don't know how to use the computer in the lab anymore because it's just become so complex. Anything else?
Library people don't know how to work either. At one library, I have cards all over the place. So one of the places I went to, I wanted the correct app so that I could use their online service because theirs was not tied up with all the stuff I had. And so I did all I know to do, and I couldn't get it to work. So this other person, a library person, tech person, puts another app on. The thing does not work. So I'm back there 3 or 4 times, and there's someone who was a former library worker in that library and knew how to do it. She said, oh, I'll do it for you. And it was done, and it worked.
Yeah, I struggle with that as a technology trainer right now in many of our classes because what we're seeing, it used to be the majority of people didn't know anything. So you came to the class to learn something. And now what we're seeing is this huge range of skills coming into the class. And so I've got 2 people that have never seen the program and 2 other people that probably know as much as I do about it. And, you know, they're all looking to get different questions answered. So for us, you know, we can't make classes too big because you still are going to have to attend to the individuals in the class and try to help everybody a little bit. It's hard. It's hard.
And there's even like, you know, one of the big divides is going to be people that can afford the devices to connect to the technology and those who can't. And we run into that already. I mean, there are people that come into the library because they can't afford to maintain a computer in their home and, you know, keep updating the software and buy the applications that the programs that they need and stuff. And then they come into the library and then you know, the training that they give us to help the people, it's like, you know, going to your classes and other classes and schoolwork and stuff, that it's kind of a crapshoot. I mean, they come in every day and they'll ask a question, I'm like, oh, never had that one before. Well, let's try something. And so you see that there's becoming a bigger and bigger divide, like people that can't afford it or are just petrified of it, or think they're like too old to learn it, or just don't want to learn it. Just show me how to print my time card out, you know, or my pay stub. It's just going to make the divide even worse.
Yeah, even our, you know, as a public library worker, even our employee groups have that whole range of skills and understanding of technology. And yeah, it is hard. My favorite is the kid who comes in and says, I'm only here because my printer broke. And then they complain about how slow the technology is, and why isn't it printing, you know, faster? The printer broke. All right. Everybody good?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful
No.
Right.